Before the video starts, I just did give an update. I will not actually have my webcam up for this video, just given the fact that I was struggling to actually get through this episode. I was having some throat issues, and I was drinking a blue slushy to try and get through it. And you guys just don't want to see me with blue teeth through an entire video, so it'll just be audio. I'll have pictures up for you guys for where we are in the chapter for the most part, when I can find them, corresponding to the show. But yeah, so I hope you guys all enjoy. And also the Game of Thrones reread. I've been having some massive issues with YouTube in terms of downloading them off of YouTube and letting me upload them to the second channel. It just gives me an error when I try to download them. So I will get that up as soon as I can, but for now I'm not finding any solutions to that issue. But enjoy the video. Welcome back to the Grease Goblins Rereads YouTube channel. Today's video we're going to be talking about Jon for A Clash of Kings. I will say with Jon, he is the POV, in my opinion, outside of Daenerys, that feels the most isolated from the story. He is someone that has a lot of shorter chapters. The story just doesn't focus on Jon much in this book, especially not in the first half of the book anyway. So we're going to be going through getting to the Fist of the First Men and a discovery that Jon makes. I will say, guys, my throat is kind of bothering me a bit for this recording, so bear with me on that. I've got a blue slushy to try and help as I get through this script and stuff, but yeah, just keep that in mind. I'm trying my best. Getting into page 381, Jon Snow and members of the Night's Watch ride up a steep, isolated hill called the Fist of the First Men. It's a prominent landmark that seems very old, which will be a really big part of really this chapter and of really Storm of Swords as well. This will be a main stage location for the Night's Watch as a whole. But it's a landmark that juts out above the surrounding forest. It's kind of in my opinion, it's like a Weathertop of Lord of the Rings. It has a nice commanding location around all of its trees and things like that. But as we'll find out, it's not as good in terms of trying to see people coming through this forest or things like that. It has a good commanding view on one side of it, but not so much on the other. The hill is named for its shape, resembling a giant fist punching up from the earth with its bare, stone-knuckled slopes. Again, really gives you that feeling of just Weathertop of Lord of the Rings is the best way I can describe it, but it is just somewhere that's very defensible. That's why they're going there. Jon leaves Ghost under the trees, but the direwolf keeps running off. After the third time, Lord Commander Mormont loses patience and tells Jon to just let him go so they can reach the top before dusk. So there's a number of things that are really interesting about what's going on here. Ghost, as a whole, seems to be on edge. Even when Jon tries to almost pull Ghost to go up to the Fist, he doesn't want to. And something that George tells us all throughout the series is that the direwolves seem like they are more intelligent than they're letting on to be. They seem to sense danger and things of that nature. You think about Grey Wind at the twins later on in the story. So I really think this is a warning. Ghost is trying to warn them this isn't a good idea. And also the history of the Fist of the First Men could also be playing into that as well. I also do think there's a little bit of probably Bloodraven manipulating events. Ghost's behavior in this chapter is not normal whatsoever. Not only does he completely disobey Jon at multiple points, he leads Jon on this kind of scavenger hunt that seems very weird for Ghost to randomly just do. So there's a lot in this chapter where Ghost acts very suspicious. They circle the hill to find a gap in the chest-high ring wall at the summit that's large enough to bring horses through. It really tells you, what's great about this location for the Night's Watch to set up their base at is that it is really defensible. You can only get through one little area with horses. The natural land is protecting them. And when you start putting in things like stakes and all that kind of stuff, it should be a very good position. Even with the Night's Watch having lesser numbers, if you can bottleneck, say, wildling forces, you stand a better chance. Still not as good as that if you're at the wall, for instance, but you can understand the logic here, even if I don't really like this expedition north of the wall. Upon reaching the summit, Mormont praises the location, saying it's excellent ground for a camp, strong and defensible, which I agree with. I do think in terms of if you're going to set up anywhere in the north for a camp, this is probably the best spot. Mormont dismounts, dislodging his raven, which flies off, cawing. The summit is surrounded by a ring of ancient stones covered in lichen? Not sure on that word pronunciation. And moss, remnants of an old First Men fortification. It's really interesting because you think about the connections that could have to the Children of the Forest, Blood Raven, the Three-Eyed Crow. That's why I think it's very interesting that it seems like the magic that is on Ghost seems to be at its strongest here. But it also has a lot of deep history that we'll see this be another battleground for the Night's Watch versus the others. Thorin Smallwood echoes the sentiment, noting that it's an old and strong place, suitable for their camp while they wait for Corn Halfhand to arrive. That's the whole thing. The Night's Watch is not at full force yet. They need to be at full force if they're going to somehow defeat Mance and the Wildlings, which they don't know the full numbers of, but they do know they're very much on the lesser number side. As we get into page 382, as the Night's Watch inspects the summit, Mormont's raven circles overhead, repeatedly squawking, "Old, old, old." Yes, on the surface value, this does reference that this fortress is old, but again, Mormont's raven seems to be kind of sending a message to them, right? It's very much given a lot of attention to. The animals are very much focused on by George R. R. Martin in this chapter, and I don't think that that's something that's just, there, that we're not supposed to look into. That's definitely there for us to look into. Lord Commander Mormont snaps at the bird to be quiet. Though he tries to hide it, Jon notices the physical strain of the climb on the older man. I can only imagine, right? You think about what Jeor Mormont's having to be doing, right? And he's getting to an older age, and he's not sleeping all that well. You're sleeping outside or in tents, which provides some warmth, but still, you're in the cold most of the day, if not all of the day. You're not being fed the best amount of food. It's really tough for people that are of older age to be in these conditions. And, Jeor Mormont, for all the credit we give him being this brave guy and all that stuff, this really just kind of paints this was a stupid expedition to begin with. Thorin Smallwood comments the height and terrain make the spot easily defensible, and Mormont agrees and allows the raven to land on his ringmail-covered forearm. Jon raises a concern about access to water, noting that the only brook is at the base of the hill outside the defensive ring, which is true, right? If you're kind of thinking about if you're going to be sieged, you need to have access to water. Again, you can go much longer without food, but if you don't have water, you'll die very quickly. So the solution is going to be, well, they need to stockpile their water and all of that stuff. But if you're sieged and, if you're a Mance Raider and you just have some wildlings siege this for, I don't know, a couple weeks, the Night's Watch is toast. So it's a good question by Jon, but given the fact that they're only a very small party against these wildlings, I would take the highly defensible position over the easy access to water, and that's exactly what Thorin Smallwood and Mormont basically say. With the decision made, the Night's Watch set up camp, and Mormont orders that every opening in the stone ring be ditched and fortified before nightfall. They don't want to be surprised, and you want to feel somewhat safe, which is exactly correct. After helping the camp duties, Jon goes looking for Ghost, who returns silently and suddenly from the woods like morning mist. This is not unusual for Ghost. I know I have kind of put a lot of attention on Ghost and Mormont's Raven, but here, Ghost is somebody that doesn't really make a lot of noise and things of that nature. That kind of, again, is reflected in Ghost's name. But when they approach the ring fort, Ghost refuses to enter, sniffing the stones and pulling away, seemingly disturbed. It feels a lot like Greywind at the Twins. Ghost does not want to be here. He can maybe smell the death or the others and around the area. He knows this isn't a good place, and this could be Bloodraven influencing Ghost, right? Trying to get Jon not to stay here because he could die here against the others, and that's not in Bloodraven's plans or the Three-Eyed Crow's plans. Or this could be Ghost acting on instinct. We just don't really know. Jon tries to drag him inside, but can't. Ghost is very big, weighs a lot. You can't really force a direwolf to go where a direwolf doesn't want to go. Confused and frustrated, Jon lets the direwolf go off the hunt, noting how unnatural the wolf's hesitation feels. There's something up with Ghost, and even Jon picks up on that as we get into page 383. As dust settles, Jon feels uneasy, despite the strong defensive position of the Fist of the First Men, and he should. You're in the deep north right now, you're highly undermanned, and also your direwolf is kind of giving you warning signs that this is an uneasy place, that maybe we shouldn't be here. Jon then once again thinks about the hill offering excellent visibility and steep protective slopes, especially to the north and the west. But here's the thing, it's not fully defensible. Jon reflects on the area's ancient past, thinking of the first men and possibly lingering spirits. This is an interesting thought because there does seem to be this almost ghostly or magic feel around the Fist of the First Men, and there seems to be other forces at work. He climbs the stone ring to look over the landscape. The Milkwater River glows gold in the fading light, and mountains loom distant and snow-capped. Forests stretch endlessly to the south and east, dense and shifting, like a stormy green sea. Jon imagines unseen dangers moving beneath the canopy, approaching silently. This is what's so interesting, is we know that if anything was to come from these forests, you wouldn't really be able to see them until they really got to where you were. That kind of defeats your purpose of having a vantage point. And so, yes, this is a great position overall, but it has its weaknesses. You can approach it just on different sides. If you go towards the more forested side of the hill, you can get there much closer, something we'll see end up playing out later on. Samwell Tarly calls up to Jon, asking if he's well. Jon hides his fears, not wanting to unsettle Sam, who seems more confident lately. Sam is maybe growing more accustomed to being north of the wall, and we talked about this a lot in the last chapter with Sam, so we won't linger on it here, but it does, it is Jon being a leader, right? Hiding his own fears for, his friend and Sam. Jon explains that Mormont plans to wait for Qhorin Halfhand's arrival, and Sam asks about the history of the ring fort and prepares a raven to send word back. He jokes that if he could fly, he'd return to Castle Black for a pork pie. Jon smiles and claps Sam on the shoulder, comforted by the moment of friendship. Almost this relief of this tension that Jon is feeling, this uneasiness that is kind of resting in his heart, and also the idea that Ghost is not with him. Ghost seems disconnected from Jon in many different ways. Getting into page 304, Jon and Sam walk back through the camp as stars appear and cook fires are lit. The red comet called Mormont's Torch glows brightly in the sky. Again, we've talked about this, I feel like so much, especially early on in the book. Everybody has these different interpretations of what the comet means, and for here, it's Mormont's going north. And what's even more interesting is, you think about the Fist of the First Men, the Night's Watch aren't trying to conceal themselves at all. They're doing exactly what, Frodo does not want to do in the movies, say, with the other hobbits, where they're making a campfire, which, if you're on a tower, anyone can see that you're there for miles. It defeats your purpose of having the vantage point of seeing anything approaching you. It's kind of what they're doing. They're kind of signal firing to anyone, we're here. That's where we are. If you want to come get us, this is us. This is where we are. Jon hears the ravens, some eerily calling his name, and senses their unease. Again, the animals are very much disturbed by the situation, and they seem to call out to Jon, trying to, it seems, in my opinion, to warn him, to tell him to get out of here. He excuses himself to check on Lord Mormont, joking about the old bear getting cranky without food, which everybody gets cranky without food. So Jon, that's not a really big good observation. Mormont is in discussion with Thorin Smallwood and several other officers about what they plan to do. Mormont asks Jon to bring hot spiced wine, and Jon carefully prepares it using Mormont's exact recipe: cinnamon, nutmeg, honey, raisins, nuts, and dried berries, but no lemons. And it's very much cooked in a certain way. You can only add certain amounts. Jeor Mormont is very particular about his wine. Inside the tent, officers debate their route into the Frostfangs. Jarman Buckwell suggests following the Milkwater, though it risks detection by Mance Rayder, and Sir Malador Locke suggests the Giant Stair or Skirling Pass if it's clear. Jon serves the wine, and Mormont nods in approval after testing it. Here's the biggest issue. Up to this point, Jeor Mormont and the Rangers, this has kind of been somewhat of a familiar path to them, right? But once you start going deeper and further into the north of, the wall, past the wall, you get further and further from the wall, from help. You go straight into wildling territory where they have all the advantages and you have none. And so if you're Jeor Mormont, you got to be thinking about that. What is our play here? Right? Do we stay and try to ambush them? Do we just want them to attack us and we have the defensible position? We can take them down that way. What is the plan? That's what's on everybody's mind. The Night's Watch have no idea what the plan is right now. They have no idea why they're here. They have an idea of why they're here, but they don't know exactly what they're going to be doing in the future. And that's what's going to get people to turn against Jeor Mormont in the future. Sir Otten Withers warns against entering the Frostfangs due to dangerous winter storms, and Mormont replies they won't go into the mountains unless necessary. The wildlings will have to descend eventually. And Mormont is smart to realize they can't stay there forever. right? Mance is gathering all these people for one purpose. It seems to go, south of the wall. He can't do that if he stays in the Frostfangs forever. And if you're Mormont, there's no reason to expend your resources going further and further away from the wall. He believes they are well positioned to block the wildlings' path along the Milkwater, and Sir Mallador notes that the wildlings may not avoid battle. They number in the thousands, and the Night's Watch has only 300 men even after Qhorin Halfhand arrives. But this is kind of what I want to talk about. They number in the thousands. You number in the hundreds. Not all of these men are great fighting men. Yes, you're bringing the best of the Night's Watch, but your odds are terrible. And what if the wildlings don't attack the Night's Watch? What if they just keep going? What if they go right past you and they cut off you being able to, defend the wall? There's so many things here that I dislike about the planning because the Night's Watch hold none of the cards. The wildlings hold all of them. So getting into page 385, Mormont declares that if battle comes, the Fist is excellent ground to defend, which I do agree, albeit, again, they have way superior numbers than your own. And they're also going to have giants. So it's not great looks for them. Now, do they know that they have a large force of giants and mammoths? At this point, no. But that is what we do know. He orders defensive preparations, pits, spikes, call traps, and repairing breaches in the ring wall. Jarman Buckwell is told to post the best scouts in a ring around the camp and along the rivers, hidden in trees. They don't want to be just surprised in the middle of the night. That's more or less what Mormont is trying to do, what Jaime should have done a better job of. Mormont emphasizes the need to bring up extra water and dig Kirstens for later use. Thorin Smallwood begins to argue for wider ranging patrols, but Mormont insists rangers stay on this side of the river until Qhorin Halfhand arrives. He doesn't want to lose more men. Again, Jeor Mormont has already been losing men. He's been losing some of his best men. He doesn't want to unnecessarily put people in positions where they could easily be killed by wildlings, the others. We're getting much further into the north that more danger arises. Smallwood complains Mance Raider could be massing nearby undetected, and Mormont replies that Craster told them where Mance is gathering, and he believes Craster was truthful. Craster was truthful. I think it does make sense to trust him, given the fact what Jeor gave them, and Jeor also doesn't have any deep love for the wildlings either. Smallwood leaves the tent sullenly, and the others leave a bit more respectfully. A lot of people are questioning Mormont's leadership here. Their numbers, they just don't have them. How long will their supplies last? They're in kind of a weird spot right now. It's what turns people against Mormont. Mormont asks then to Jon if Ghost has found any game, and Jon says the wolf hasn't returned yet. Mormont remarks they could use fresh meat and feeds corn to his raven. He asks Jon if he's wrong to keep the rangers close. Jon says it's not his place to say, which is of course the truth. He's not one of the people in charge, but Mormont wants to hear his counsel all the same. Jon admits staying near the Fist makes it unlikely they'll find Benjen. That's what Jon is concerned about. He wants to find where his uncle is, but here's the issue. You've traveled this far into the north. You've seen really no indications of Benjen. It's not looking good. And Mormont agrees, finding one man in such vast country is nearly impossible, especially if he's a corpse. If Benjen is dead at this point, he could be anywhere. He could be in the Frostfangs. The wildlings could have taken him and just completely destroyed his remains. It's impossible to know exactly what happened. And as of right now, if Benjen's still alive, the best idea would be to just stay in one place. Eventually, that news will get to Benjen that they're at the Fist. When asked if they should give up the search, Jon thinks it might be easier for one man to find 200 than the other way around, which is kind of true. I mean, think about, for instance, there are a lot of cases of people, getting lost in forests and things like that. And in a lot of ways, it usually can come down to sometimes the person that's lost finding all these people looking for them. Because if you're someone that's lost, what they're telling you is you should just stay put because it's easier to track you. You won't get farther away from where you went missing, all that type of stuff. So if you're sitting in a tree or you're sitting on the ground and you hear a bunch of people talking around you and stuff like that, you're going to find them easier than they were going to find you. So in a lot of ways, I think Mormont and Jon kind of come to the right idea. Albeit at this point, it's not looking good for Benjen. Mormont seems to consider the idea, and his raven watches Jon, head tilted and eyes glittering once again. the animals have some sort of focus on Jon, and they seem to be giving him a warning, because as we get into page 386, the raven lets out a harsh cry. Again, it seems to be telling Jon to flee. Mormont smiles and notes their large camp will leave a trail even Maester Aemon could follow. He believes that if Benjen Stark is alive and free, he will find his way to them. Jon hesitantly raises the possibility that Benjen might be dead. If they haven't found him yet, he hasn't picked up their trail, he hasn't come back to them, likely it could be he's dead. Now, the Raven also repeats this, that Benjen might be dead, dead, dead. Is that an indication that Benjen is truly dead? Or is it something along the lines that Benjen, maybe he's turned into another? We just don't know. It's a very interesting question that's still a huge mystery today. Mormont says Benjen might still come to them, unfortunately, like the remained corpses of Othar and Jaffer. Maybe we'll see Benjen as another. I think that's a possibility as well. The ravens continue shrieking dead as it ruffles its feathers. Now, I think there's a number of meanings as to why maybe this raven could be saying dead. Is it to say that Benjen is dead? Is it what I talked about earlier? Is it also to kind of reference many of these men? A good portion of them will be dead by the end of this campaign, given the others' attack. And the birds and Ghost, they all seem to realize something is up. Mormont strokes the bird, yawns, and decides to sleep rather than eat. He tells Jon to wake him at first light. Jon leaves the tent, hears laughter and music, and smells stew cooking. Though Mormont isn't hungry, Jon is, and heads towards the central fire. Dywyn, the old forester, claims the woods smell wrong, says it smells cold. And this is interesting right away, because we're going to get into what Dywyn actually thinks of. What does it smell like when it's cold? And it seems that Dywyn picks up on the idea that the others are growing closer. Dolorous Ed jokes that all he smells is horse dung and stew. Hake insults Dywyn and gives Jon a bowl of stew, thick with barley, carrot, onion, and bits of salt beef. Gren asks Dywyn what he means by cold. Dywyn just says that's how it smells. Hake mocks him, saying cold has no smell. Dywyn thinks to indicate that cold smells like death. And that's something that Jon also kind of agrees with. He remembers the chill of death in Mormont's quarters and thinks cold smells like death. Think about how many times the cold takes people, especially in medieval times. You know, having a fire can mean the difference between life and death in this world, especially north of the wall. And we're going to see how the cold impacts, for instance, Samwell Tarly and their party returning from this journey. But yeah, there's all the indicators here. Everything is being shown that this is not the place to stay. They should leave. The others are growing closer. He loses his appetite thinking about the attack of the others and gives his stew to Gren and walks off into the night. The wind is brisk, frost will come by morning, and everything will freeze. This is a tough way to live, right? I've tent camped, and the lowest it probably was maybe high 40s, maybe low 50s, and I was freezing cold. I don't know if I'm just not built for the outside, which is kind of weird because I actually usually like the cold. Maybe just underprepared because we were going in May. You would have thought it wouldn't have been that cold. I cannot imagine sleeping in probably below freezing conditions. That's crazy to me. Many of these people will die because of the cold. This just kind of adds that layer of it. But it also kind of shows that, like, this place seems to be growing colder by the minute. Jon puts more wood on the fire and sets the last of the spiced wine to reheat. As we get into page 387, Jon flexes his fingers to keep them warm as the first watch takes their stations around the camp. Torches flicker along the ring wall under a moonless sky filled with stars. From the darkness, the distant howling of wolves rises, a cold, lonely sound that makes Jon uneasy. Once again, the animals are really paid a heavy attention to in this chapter as it builds the unease, and maybe even reflecting this wolf pack that we'll eventually see later on in the story, especially in A Dance with Dragons, in the prologue, and also with Bran. Across the fire, red eyes gleam from the shadows. Ghost appears unexpectedly, making no noise, but it very is interesting as you see the red eyes gleaming. It's something that kind of gives off another eerie vibe. Jon speaks to Ghost, but is surprised to see him before dawn. This is irregular behavior from Ghost, and he calls him closer. Once again, I very much think that this end part of the chapter, if you don't believe there's been any manipulation by the Three-Eyed Crow, Bloodraven, the Children of the Forest, whatever, here, I just strongly believe that that has to be the case, because this just is not normal behavior. Jon senses Ghost is alert to danger. The wolf had awoken him with a warning. Ghost circles the fire, sniffing Jon in the wind, but doesn't seem interested in hunting. Jon senses Ghost is alert to danger. The wolf had awoken him with a warning, very similar to what we see in the first book, when Ghost is the thing that alerts Jon to the others attacking. Jon stands anxious and asks if Ghost has a scent. He remembers Tywin saying the forest smells cold and of death. At this, Ghost runs off, looks back, and signals to Jon to follow. This does not seem like normal behavior. This seems like a human inside of his wolf telling him how to do it without being able to speak. Jon pulls up his cloak hood and leaves the camp, moving away from the fire and the horses. You must think that Jon is mad. If you saw Jon randomly in the middle of the night going into the forest, you'd think, well, he's kind of insane. Think about all the dangers that are north of the wall and going out alone. One horse wickers nervously as Ghost passes, and Jon calms it and strokes its muzzle. Near the ring wall, a guard challenges Jon, but Jon explains he's fetching water for the Lord Commander. The guard dismisses him without another look. Everybody knows Jon is kind of like the favorite right now of Jeor Mormont. It's probably not good to stop him, even if he is lying. It's kind of a weird request for Jon to go get water in the middle of the night. Jon slips between sharpened stakes, and Ghost slides beneath easily. Jon grabs a torch thrust into a crevice. Its flames flutter in the wind as he descends the steep, rocky hill. The camp's noise fades behind him as the night deepens. Jon carefully navigates the uneven slope, questioning his own actions in the dark. Jon himself feels half mad for what he's doing. He could easily slip in the middle of the night, break something, and he would never be found in the middle of the night. He'd probably die. So this is a very dangerous situation. As somebody who does like to hike, hiking at night is just that's a big no-no. You won't be able to see if there's snakes, animals, critters on the ground, anything of that nature. You won't be able to see branches. It's just a horrible idea. Trees loom like silent armored warriors, black except for faint glimmers of green when the torchlight hits them. Again, we seem to have more references to, in my opinion, the children of the forest, the old gods. We're talking about the trees being these warriors. Could they be watching Jon? I don't know. There's been a lot of mystery and magical kind of feeling of this chapter. He hears the faint sound of water flowing over rocks below him as we get into page 388. Ghost disappeared into the underbrush, and Jon struggled to follow him through thick branches and dense limbs that blocked out the stars. Jon found Ghost drinking from a stream. When called, Ghost raised his head, eyes glowing red and fierce, water dripping from his jaws. But then suddenly, Ghost dashed off into the dark woods, ignoring Jon's call to stay. Once again, Ghost does not obey Jon at all. This is very unusual, given how Ghost usually acts. It's very interesting. I just want you guys to keep all these clues in the back of your head. We've gotten too many suspicious things from animals in this chapter, in my opinion, to say that this is regular or even a coincidence. Jon faced a choice of climbing back up alone or following Ghost deeper into the forest. He followed, holding the torch low to see the hazardous ground, rocks, roots, and holes like I mentioned earlier, but even with a torch, it's still very difficult to navigate. While calling for Ghost, but the wind swallowed his words. Jon thought chasing Ghost was madness, but kept going until he saw a flash of white ahead and to the right. After running about a quarter around the hill, he lost Ghost again and stopped to catch his breath among scrub and rocks. This has got to feel just crazy, right? You're just running after a direwolf in the middle of the night. But then he hears a soft scrabbling noise caught his attention. He moved carefully toward it, though through boulders and thorn bushes. Behind a fallen tree, Jon found Ghost digging furiously at a rounded mound of loose, sandy earth. Jon lowered the torch to see the mound more clearly and guessed it might be a grave, but he wondered whose. Who would have some sort of cache or grave at the foot of the Fist of the First Men? This seemed to be placed here. He knelt and jammed the torch into the ground, then pulled loose sandy soil by the fistful. The earth was freshly disturbed, no stones or roots, and 2 feet down, Jon's fingers touched cloth. Expecting a corpse, Jon was surprised to find small, hard, unyielding shapes beneath the fabric with no smell or sign of decay. This was placed here quite recently. It was placed in a way that no human would ever find it, but Ghost does. So there's a couple things we have to think about here. So the first one is, this was not placed in a way that some normal Night's Watchman would have found it. 2, it was not placed here so that Jon would find it. It is specifically placed here so that an animal would find it. This seems to be very suspicious. Is this the work of Cold Hands? Could Benjen have been behind this? Could it be something that, again, Bloodraven or the Three-Eyed Crow, the Children of the Forest played here? We know that there's a Night's Watch cloak that is placed here as well. So we know it had to have been one of those kind of options. It seems likely it's either Cold Hands or Benjen, but we don't know who. But we do know that there's this connection between what occurred in this chapter with, say, Bloodraven manipulating the animals and this character. That's why I likely think this was Cold Hands who placed this cache at the Fist of the First Men for Jon to find, well, through Ghost, of course, and that could help them because he knows of what is going to happen. Now, another question then comes right up. Why not just give these straight up to Jon? And there's a number of reasons. One, the first major reason here is that Jon might be freaked out by Cold Hands, might not even believe Cold Hands, all this stuff. It's much easier to just lead him to the trail without having to explain all this stuff. Also, Jon has a purpose, and revealing some of these things like the Three-Eyed Crow and all that stuff now doesn't necessarily need to happen. So, yeah, in my opinion, this was definitely placed here for Jon and for specifically Ghost to find. That in itself is very suspicious. Ghost sat back and watched as Jon brushed soil away to reveal a rounded bundle about 2 feet across. Jon worked the bundle loose. When lifted it shifted and clinked, sounding unlike coins or metal, something else entirely. Getting on page 389, a frayed rope bound the bundle tightly. As Jon unsheathed his dagger and cut the rope, he pulled at the cloth edges and the bundle spilled onto the ground, shining with dark and bright objects. The contents included a dozen knives, leaf-shaped spearheads, and numerous arrowheads. Jon picked up a dagger blade, feather light and shiny black with no hilt. Torchlight traced a thin orange line around its edge, revealing it was razor-sharp dragonglass, aka obsidian. This is really weird. The one thing that can help the Night's Watch defend against the others is the one thing that they are granted. At a time where the pacing of, again, this storyline is starting to creep up. The others are starting to make their way towards the Night's Watch. Jon wondered if Ghost had uncovered an ancient cache left by the Children of the Forest, buried for thousands of years at the Fist of the First Men. We know that not to be the case. That cannot be the case. Maybe this cache is very old, of course, but it was reburied by someone very recently. That is what we are told by the findings by Jon. That can't be the case. These could be very ancient, but at the very same time, they're placed by someone quite recently. Beneath the dragon glass was an old war horn made from an aurochs horn banded with bronze. Many have speculated, myself included, this could possibly be the Horn of Winter. But if this is the Horn of Winter, why would someone give it to Jon specifically? Is that because this is just what needs to happen? Is this fate? Is it that Bloodraven, the Three-Eyed Crow, whoever, has seen the importance of this horn and that this is the only way, like a Doctor Strange thing in Infinity War type situation? It would seem weird to give Jon a horn that has immense power. Do the Three-Eyed Crow and the Children of the Forest even know what that horn does? If it is the Horn of Winter, still many questions come from this horn. Jon shook dirt from inside the horn, causing a stream of arrowheads to fall out. He pulled up a corner of the cloth, wrapping the weapons, and rubbed it between his fingers. It was good quality wool, thick, double weave, damp, but not rotted. Again, it tells you this cloak is kind of fresh. This isn't something that is in bad quality at all. And so you can also make the indication that maybe this was Benjen, given his cloth would still be quite good. The cloth hadn't been buried long, and it was very dark in color. Jon pulled the cloth close to the torchlight. It was black. Before fully standing, Jon realized what he had found, the black cloak of a sworn brother of the Night's Watch. And that's how the chapter ends. A really great chapter. I think this is Jon's best chapter, just in terms of we get a little bit more into the magic and the eeriness of North of the Wall. A lot of these things foreshadow things that Bran will see in the future, the things that he'll be able to do, in my opinion. And I really enjoy this chapter because, yes, Jon does not stay at the Fist of the First Men. And yes, this is more of a build-up chapter for Samwell's plot in A Storm of Swords. It is very crucial to that storyline. And so I really enjoyed this one. Hopefully, you guys don't realize too much that my throat's kind of bothering me right now. But yeah, I hope you guys all enjoyed. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.